Week 2 of the election is now over, and things are looking strange. Now, very briefly, I'm going to go over the 338 Canada projections, and we do actually have some things that we need to talk about. Looking at the projections, we can see it is disastrous for the Conservatives. The Conservatives are holding on to their seats with their 37%, but because the Liberals on the aggregate right now are at 44%, they get a majority. And we can see it in the seat counts. Now, if we look at the graphs, we can see that things have kind of evened out over the last few days on 338 Canada's projections, and the same goes for the seat counts. But there is something very notable that is happening in the polls that you can't really see on 338's projections because it is an aggregate, and aggregates are less prone to larger swings in data. So, taking a look at the Wikipedia page, which is not an aggregate and just plots the data points where they are as they happen, we can see there is a bit of a tightening going on, as there was a tightening last week. Now, this is the first thing I want to talk about. Liaison, Nanos, and Main Street all do 3-day rolling polls. They all have slightly different methodology in terms of how they collect the data, but they are all 3-day rolling polls. And we can see that all of them saw a better lead for the Conservatives in today's updates, the day that I'm recording this. So this is from Saturday's collection data, than we saw in the weekdays. So Nanos went from an 11-point lead to a 6.4% lead. Main Street was the most minor, went from a 3 to a 2-point lead. And Liaison went from an 8-point lead to a 5-point lead for the Liberals. Now, Abacus also released in this time period. They do weekly stuff, and they had a tie. And we'll get to Abacus in a second. Now, focusing on the 3-day rolling polls, most of the dots here are those 3-day rolling polls, simply because they come out every single day. So you're going to have plot points every single day. So one thing to keep in mind with this trend line is how things are moving throughout the week. Now, there was a phenomenon in 2021 where the Conservatives were doing much better in the polls on the weekends than they were during the weekdays. Now, we can't say 100% why that was happening, but the very likely reason is that there was a higher Conservative response bias, simply because the people working during the week were not working on the weekend, and therefore the numbers were much better for the Conservatives on the weekend because they could actually answer the polls of whatever method it is. So if you look on the 31st and the 1st, you will see there was a slight narrowing. This is from the Saturday and Sunday data. And then during the week, it grew much larger, and now, today, we are seeing the data from Saturday tightening again. Now, we'll have to wait and see tomorrow on Monday for our Sunday's data to see if this tightening continues, but there's a good chance it will, simply because the Conservative response bias on the weekends seems to be a thing. But that's not the only response bias that we need to talk about. As I mentioned, Abacus has a 0-point lead, meaning it's tied. And they're not the only ones to show something similar. Now, we have to scroll back a little bit because they haven't released in a little while. But Innovative has a 1% lead for the Conservatives. I would expect them to be releasing sometime soon. Hopefully they release soon. Now, what's not on the Wikipedia page anymore is from Kalowski Strategy. Now, this is a polling firm that has never released publicly before, right? They have been around since 2014, and I believe their CEO is related to the Conservatives in his past, he had worked for the Conservative Party. I don't remember in what capacity, but there are accusations of bias. However, I don't think that's quite accurate because most of what Kalowski is showing here is very much in line with Abacus and Innovative. And there's a reason for that. Kalowski, as we found out recently, and along with Abacus and Innovative, weigh by past vote. Now, what does that mean? So what that means is when you're taking the polls and you're weighing them, you can do it by a lot of ways. Most pollsters use just simple census data. But the problem with census data is that it's very susceptible to enthusiastic response biases, meaning people that are very enthusiastically responding to polls are going to artificially inflate certain numbers. Whereas if you can weigh it by the 2021 data, you will take away that enthusiastic response bias and give you what is likely a more accurate picture. And as we saw from the CPC's weekend biases in the polls, weighing by past vote will neutralize a lot of the exacerbated response biases we see during the week. So, what does that look like in practice? This is a very prominent Twitter account. They ran a very small poll themselves, and this is what they got if they did not weigh their poll by past vote. They had the Liberals at 47 and the Conservatives at 38. But when they weighed their data by past vote, it was Conservatives at 44, Liberals at 42. That is a massive swing in the percentages, and that shows just how big weighing by past vote is compared to anything else. So when we look back at all of the polls, and we look at Nanos has a 6.4% lead, know that they are not weighing by past vote. They are weighing by census data. So that leads into Abacus's data. Abacus, this is the one where everything is tied federally, but in those that are certain to vote, the Conservatives are actually up. They're up by 2%. Now, it's not a lot, and this would likely still result in a weak Liberal minority government simply because of how votes are dispersed around the country, but it is a significant difference. And I want to show you this. This is the voter enthusiasm from Abacus. Now, I still think it is underestimating the 18 to 29 vote. I don't know why they do 18 to 29. That's actually very different from a lot of other pollsters. I still think they're underestimating this. I do expect the 18 to 24 vote to be much higher in turnout. But regardless, even with this lower percentage, we're still seeing the Conservatives lead. And that's with the 60-plus boomers being at 84% very likely or definitely going to vote. And continuing with Abacus data, among those who say they didn't vote in 2021, they are heavily favored Conservatives, and non-voters who are certain to vote are even more heavily favored Conservative. So this is primarily in the 18 to 29 range that Abacus shows. If Abacus is not able to capture the voter enthusiasm in the 18 to 29 demographic, and it's actually, say, closer to 60%, which is what Trudeau's 2015 youth wave was, then you're going to have a much greater Conservative lead than what Abacus is showing among the definitely to vote crowd. So keep all of this data in mind as we move closer to the debates and closer to the election. Weighing by past vote, I think, is going to have the greatest impact on the electoral outcome, but it's not a silver bullet. The only poll that really matters is, of course, the election day, and we can only wait and see how that goes on. Now, one final thing to note for the polls. In Main Street, Pierre has seen a large increase in his approval rating, up 11%, and Carney has seen it go down. Now, the point of something like this has nothing to do with vote intention, but rather who someone might be open to voting for. If you look at a candidate and you think, oh, I actually don't really mind them, you might be more open to voting for them. And so in my opinion, numbers like this indicate that more people are open to voting Conservative than they were at the start of the campaign, and less people are open to voting Liberal than they were at the start of the campaign. So that's another positive sign in what is otherwise a not very positive top-line number. Now, moving on, I want to talk about the Bloc quickly. In order for the Liberals to not win a majority, the Bloc needs to have a strong resurgence. And I don't mean like 2 or 3%. They need to go from around the 24% that they're sitting at average right now into the low 30s. If they can do that, they should be able to block a Liberal majority government simply because the seat-rich area of Quebec is normally, not always, but normally what gives Liberals a majority government, because they will get very close to a majority outside of Quebec, and then they'll gain the majority in Quebec. We really need the Bloc to do it, but the Bloc is desperate. Now, I've done the translate here by Google, and you can see that the Bloc is getting very desperate. It is not a good sign when the Bloc or the NDP are begging you to vote for them in order to block a majority or to help a specific region because you can't trust the other guys. It shows that they are getting very worried about their poll numbers. Furthermore, I tweeted that exact thing about this tweet. This is a Bloc Québécois tweet, and this guy was going on air and translating this post. It's even more desperate, right? Literally begging people not to vote for the Liberals because it would give them a majority. This guy blocked me, which is a bit of a proud moment. I got blocked by a Bloc Québécois candidate, so that's nice to see. But the reality is that this is desperate behavior, and the Bloc really needs to see some improving numbers. The good news for the block is that they typically receive a boost in the polls following the debates. I don't know why exactly this is. It might just be because people are reminded that they like how Blanchette speaks, or they're reminded that they don't like the Liberal candidate. But every time the debates happen, the block goes up. Now, the day after I uploaded the last update, Paul Chiang quit. And this was after Carney had endorsed him to be like, no, I've got his back. This was very unusual, to say the least. It also reflected very poorly on Carney that he backed a guy that ended up quitting later that same day, although he quit at 9:55 p.m. And yet, this didn't seem to have a huge impact on the polls. Now, this happened March 31st, so again, let's take a look here. March 31st, you can't include the data for March 31st because this is actually the data from March 30th. The Liberals actually went up. So it's very difficult to make any kind of conclusion that this story had any effect on the polling in terms of the top line numbers, but it might have contributed to the falling favorability of Carney. That is a possibility, but it's not guaranteed in any way. And of course, the RCMP is actually still looking into Paul Chiang, so this story, while it's over for this election, might actually go on sometime in the future. Now, another thing to talk about is the ad spend. This is the first 7 days of the campaign, and this is just pitiful. Like, the NDP put out a press statement before the election the day before saying they were going to spend to the max, spend to the limit. They don't appear to be doing that. We'll have to wait and see how the NDP spending is for this past week, because I don't think this data is going to come out until after I upload this video. But this is genuinely pathetic. The NDP has a chance to pull off a 2011 style comeback, especially in Quebec, but they're so incompetent that they can't even get more than $20,000 of ad spending. And don't get it twisted, they have the money. In their press statement, they said they made $80,000 from one candidate in one night from an election fundraiser. So where the hell is that money going? Well, some of that money is apparently going to OnlyFans creators. This headline is wild. I don't think I need to put any commentary above it. I think it speaks for itself. And finally, we will talk about some gun stuff. Now, this statement by Natalie Prevost, the hoplophobe extraordinaire, said that the list of firearm prohibitions include military-grade weapons only, and she's confident that the commitments aligned last December will be implemented as they stand, essentially saying they want to continue with all the gun bans. And that is pretty accurate, considering what the news that we got this week, which was the crypto got banned by FRT. Now, I made a community post about this, and Ian Runkle made a very good video about it, so I would very much recommend you check out Ian Runkle's video if you haven't already. So this is a very interesting situation in all of the worst ways. So if you're wondering how they can say that this gun is a variant of the AR-15, which is the paragraph it was banned under, when you see Para 87, that is the AR-15 ban from the OIC. So when you see that and you think, well, how can they say that it's not compatible with an AR-15 receiver? That's kind of the problem. There is no definition of a variant in any part of the Canadian Criminal Code and any part of anywhere. It is a made-up definition that changes often. So what that means is that the RCMP can unilaterally decide if something is considered a variant by changing their own definition of variant. So even though the crypto could not be compatible with any AR-15 receiver, that didn't matter because there's no set definition that is what defines a variant. And I said this in my crypto video when I made it back in the summer. The crypto is literally an AR-15. It is an AR-15 in every single way, except for the way that the front takedown pin works. Now, it is not compatible with AR-15 receiver sets, but because there is no definition for a variant, and it is AR-15 in every single other way, it is completely unsurprising that this got banned, especially because it's essentially the same decision that the Maccabee SLR and the ATRS Modern Sporter had. Those got banned in the exact same way via FRT saying they're AR-15s, even though they're not compatible with the receiver sets. Because in every other way, they are an AR-15, and there's no way you can argue otherwise. But as Ian Runkle discussed, it has opened the door to some very troubling legal arguments. And I need to make this very clear in video as well as I did in the community post. The FRT is not a legal instrument and it is not law. The only way a firearm can become prohibited by law is if it is banned by order in council or if it is banned by legislation. If it is banned by FRT, it is still, by the letter of the law, technically legal. The problem is that every single police outfit in the country uses the firearms reference table in order to make arrests and charge people. And if you are caught with a crypto using it, and they look up the classification of the crypto and they see that it is prohibited in the FRT, they are going to arrest you on the spot and charge you with the use of a prohibited device. And you will then have to fight in court to prove that that gun is not an AR-15. And that is an argument that has not gone well in the courts before. Now we're waiting on an appeal from the Supreme Court of Canada and the appeals courts. Ian Runkle has one going right now. But in the judgment done in the first federal court, it was not a positive outcome for the FRT cases. So know that, well, yes, you technically legally can still use them. It is extraordinarily risky, and you're not only just going to be losing your crypto if you get arrested, you're potentially going to be losing a lot of your freedoms and your ability to own firearms in general. And it's partially why I never decide to review it, because I am not comfortable reviewing a gun without an FRT. So that is it for this video. I hope you found some of the topics we discussed a little bit interesting, and if you learned anything new, I'm glad I could help. But that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Let's bring on week 3 of the campaign, and have a good day.